Yeah, this is my only before photo, straight from the Facebook Marketplace listing. It's blurry, it's tiny, and spoiler, they told me they were solid wood. They were not. Once I started sanding, I realized this is particle board over a thin veneer, paper thin, actually. So I decided to go all in, sanding, filling, fluting, and painting every inch black. Hi, I'm Lana, and together, let's make something beautiful, something made for you. First, let's start by removing the hardware. So before I started sanding, I took a close look at the tops of the nightstands, and this was actually looking pretty promising, so I thought, let's sand down to raw wood. Next, I got started on cleaning. I used Fusion TSP Alternative mixed up in a spray bottle. Then I got to the inside, and I found a few unexpected surprises. You never know what you're going to find, but this was a first. After vacuuming out the insides and cleaning them as well with the Fusion TSP Alternative, I got started on sanding the tops. I'm using 120 grit sandpaper here, and it's really just roughing up the surface, so I decided to switch over to a mesh or net sandpaper, and I have this in round, so I use just my Skill regular orbital sander. I really like this sander, I use it quite a bit. So after removing a decent amount of the finish, I knew pretty quickly that this was not going to be something that I could stain and I would have to paint. After sanding down the tops, I filled any damaged areas on the rest of the nightstands, and once that filler had dried, I sanded them back with 220 grit. Then I scuff sanded everything else by hand and wiped off all of the dust. I then sealed any spots where I had sanded through the veneer with shellac. Particle board is super porous and can swell with moisture, so shellac acts as a moisture barrier. It helps smooth out the surface and it gives the paint something solid to stick to. It's quick, it's easy, and it makes the final finish look way more professional. I chose to add fluting to the drawer fronts, and because of the trim molding around the edges of the drawers, it was a little bit more fiddly than it normally is, but I do find it's worth it. I measured each strip and then cut them on the miter saw. In order to smooth the edges, I used my orbital sander and 120 grit sandpaper. With the edges flush, I then realized that I had a little bit too much width, so I taped this off and then also sanded that edge with my orbital sander, this time to remove some of the material. I then put the nightstands up on some blocks and gave everything a coat of black primer. This black primer is water-based primer. I really like it when I'm painting dark colors. It reduces the total number of coats of paint that I need and goes on really nice and smooth. Now I am gluing the fluting onto the drawer faces. Just use some Gorilla Glue and a foam brush to spread it around evenly, and then put it in place and let it dry. After it had been drying for a bit, I noticed one spot on one of the drawers that had lifted a little bit, so I used a couple of clamps. And once that was all dry, I went in with my rectangular festool sander, sanded the fronts even, and then also sanded the edges to make sure that everything was flush. There was an area that was lifted a little bit, so I went in with my pneumatic 23 gauge nail gun and nailed down those pieces of fluting so that they wouldn't lift up. And once that was done, I was able to prime the fluting on the drawers as well. Once I was done priming everything, I noticed there was one corner of the nightstand that wasn't looking quite as good. So I used some Bondo spot putty, sanded that back with 220 grit sandpaper. Then I sprayed with clear shellac, and before the shellac was dry, I created some graining texture to make it look a bit more like the raw wood, because this is where I had sanded, like I said, right through to the particle board. Then I let this dry, and once that was all dry, I went back in and sanded lightly with 180 grit sandpaper. And after that, I primed again, and it looked much better. Finally, time for paint. I am using my favorite paint, which is Emerald Urethane Trim Enamel, and this is tricorn black in a satin finish. Cut into the edges with a brush, and then use a microfiber roller for the larger areas and to smooth everything out. With 2 coats of paint done, it was time to go back to the drawers, and I had to use a heat gun and a scraper to pull out these old felt liners. They were really not in very good shape. This always takes so much longer than you think it's going to, but it's necessary because you certainly don't want to have completely redone nightstands and these ugly looking drawer liners inside. I grabbed a few hardware options from my stash and checked to see which ones would look best. I decided to go with these vintage knobs. So I marked everything out, measured twice, and started to drill the holes. I ran out of battery though, so good thing I have 2 batteries, did a quick switch. Well, I did measure twice, but one of the drawers was off, so I had to fill the holes, which isn't great when you're working with fluting like this. But regardless, I filled the holes, I remeasured, I re-drilled the holes, and then once that was dry, I sanded smooth. Then I got back to work on the drawer interiors. They really needed a surprising amount of work, so I had to remove these last bits of felt, and I used mineral spirits to loosen them up, and then a carbide scraper to scrape it off. And then I got to sanding the inside edges of the drawers where the finish was peeling quite a bit. With the drawer interiors finally clean, I was able to measure the inside of each drawer, and then I used my Olfa cutting mat, my ruler, and my rotary cutter to get clean straight lines on this peel and stick wallpaper. I always dry fit the first piece, and then with all the pieces cut and ready to go, I pressed them into place and then also installed the vintage hardware. Let's take one last look at that blurry before pic and those solid wood tops and some of these rough spots. And here's the final result: modern, clean, and totally transformed. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to follow on social.